The seventh story. What happened in the Snow Queen's palace and afterward. The walls of the palace were made of snow, and the windows and doors of the sharp winds. It contained more than 100 halls, the largest several miles long. All were lighted by the sharp glare of the northern lights. They were huge, empty, and terrifyingly cold. Here no one had ever gathered for a bit of innocent fun, not even a dance for the polar bears, where they might have walked on their hind legs in the manner of man, and the wind could have produced the music. No one had ever been invited in for a little game of cards, with something good to eat and a bit of not too malicious gossip, nor had there ever been a tea party for young white lady foxes. No, empty, vast, and cold was the Snow Queen's palace. The northern lights burned so precisely that you could tell to the very second when they would be at their highest and their lowest points. In the middle of that enormous snow hall was a frozen lake. It had cracked into thousands of pieces, and every one of them was shaped exactly like all the others. In the middle of the lake was the throne of the Snow Queen. Here she sat when she was at home. She called the lake the Mirror of Reason, and declared that it was the finest and only mirror in the world. Little Kay was blue, indeed almost black from the cold, but he did not feel it, for the Snow Queen had kissed all feeling of coldness out of him, and his heart had almost turned into a lump of ice. He sat arranging and rearranging pieces of ice into patterns. He called this the game of reason, and because of the splinters in his eyes, he thought that what he was doing was of great importance, although it was no different from playing with wooden blocks, which he had done when he could hardly talk. He wanted to put the pieces of ice together in such a way that they formed a certain word, but he could not remember exactly what the word was. The word that he could not remember was eternity. The Snow Queen had told him that if he could place the pieces of ice so that they spelled that word, then he would be his own master, and she would give him the whole world and a new pair of skates. But however much he tried, he couldn't do it. "I'm going to the warm countries," the Snow Queen had announced that morning. "I want to look into the boiling black pots." By black pots, she meant the volcanoes, Vesuvius and Etna. "I will chalk their peaks a bit. It will do them good to be refreshed. Ice is pleasant as a dessert after oranges and lemons." The Snow Queen flew away, and Kay was left alone in the endless hall. He sat pondering the patterns of ice, thinking and thinking. He sat so still, one might have believed he was frozen to death. Little Gerda entered the castle. The winds began to whip her face, and could have cut it, but she said her prayers, and they lay down to sleep. She came into the vast, empty, cold hall. Then she saw Kay. She recognized him right away, and ran up to him and threw her arms around him, while she exclaimed jubilantly, "Kay, sweet little Kay, I have found you at last!" But Kay sat stiff and cold. Then little Gerda cried, and her tears fell on Kay's breast. The warmth penetrated to his heart and melted both the ice and the glass splinter in it. He looked at her and sang the song they had once sung together. "Our roses bloom and fade away, our infant Lord abides alway. May we be blessed his face to see, and ever little children be." Kay burst into tears, and wept so much that the grains of glass in his eyes were washed away. Now he remembered her and shouted joyfully, "Gerda, sweet little Gerda, where have you been so long, and where have I been?" Kay looked about him. "How cold it is! How empty and how huge!" And he held on to Gerda, who was so happy that she was both laughing and crying at the same time. It was so blessed, so happy a moment that even the pieces of ice felt it and started to dance, and when they grew tired, they laid down and formed exactly the word for which the Snow Queen had promised Kay the whole world and a new pair of skates. Gerda kissed him on his cheeks, and the color came back to them. She kissed his eyes, and they became like hers. She kissed his hands and feet, and the blue color left them, and the blood pulsed again through his veins. He was well and strong. Now the Snow Queen could return. It did not matter, for his right to his freedom was written in brilliant pieces of ice. They took each other by the hand and walked out of the great palace. They talked of grandmother and the roses that bloomed on the roof at home. The winds were still, and as they walked, the sun broke through the clouds. When they reached the bush with the red berries, the reindeer was waiting there for him. He had brought another young reindeer with him, and her udder was bursting with milk. The two children drank from it, and the reindeer kissed them. Then they rode on the backs of the reindeer to the home of the Finnish woman, where they got warm, were given a good meal, and instructions for the homeward journey. They visited the Lapp woman. She had sewn warm clothes for them and was getting her sled ready. The two reindeer accompanied them to the border of Lapland. There the green grass started to break through the snow, and they could not use the sled any longer. They said goodbye to the reindeer and to the Lapp woman. Soon they heard the twitter of the first birds of spring, and in the woods the trees were budding. They met a young girl, wearing a red hat and riding a magnificent horse. Gerda recognized the animal, for it was one of the horses that had drawn her golden carriage. The girl had 2 pistols stuck in her belt. She was the little robber girl, who had got tired of staying at home, and now was on her way out into the wide world. She recognized Gerda immediately, and the two of them were so happy to see each other. "You are a fine one," she said to Kay, "running off as you did. I wonder if you are worth going to the end of the world for." Gerda touched her cheek and asked her if she knew what had happened to the prince and the princess. "They have gone traveling in foreign lands," answered the robber girl. "And what about the crow?" "The crow is dead," said the girl. "His tame fiancée has become a widow. She wears a black wool thread about her leg. She thinks mourning becomes her, but it is all nonsense. But tell me what has happened to you, and how you managed to find him." And both Gerda and Kay told her everything that had happened to them. "Well, the end was as good as the beginning," said the robber girl, and took each of them by the hand and promised that if she ever came to the town where they lived, she would come and visit them. Then she rode away out into the world, and Kay and Gerda walked hand in hand homeward. It was really spring. In the ditches, the little wild flowers bloomed. The church bells were ringing. Now they recognized the towers. They were approaching their own city and the home they had left behind. Soon they were walking up the worn steps of the staircase to the old grandmother's apartment. Nothing inside it had changed. The clock said tick-tack, and the wheels moved. But as they stepped through the doorway, they realized they had grown. They were no longer children. The roses were blooming in the wooden boxes, and the window was open. There were the little stools they used to sit upon. Still holding each other's hands, they sat down, and all memory of the Snow Queen's palace and its hollow splendor disappeared. The grandmother sat in the warm sunshine, reading aloud from her Bible. "Whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of heaven as a little child shall not enter therein." Kay and Gerda looked into each other's eyes, and now they understood the words from the psalm. "Our roses bloom and fade away, our infant Lord abides alway. May we be blessed his face to see, and ever little children be." There they sat, the two of them, grown-ups, and yet in their hearts children, and it was summer, a warm, glorious summer day. The end.